Namaste and welcome.
Namaste.
Welcome all of you joining us for today's program. I'm quite excited. I can feel a very large force behind me today. Been building for a few days. I recognize that there is a time, these times that we're in right now are so extraordinary. And it is not easy to get the long view for what is in our faces these days, where truth is the lie and the lie is truth. There is a tremendous turmoil that's going on, an upheaval, in fact, that actually has its roots and principles that we're going to explore today, because we're all going through this. Every human being is an expression, a container for all that has ever happened, that is happening and will happen. It is the place where it lands in each of us. So we carry, even if we have no access to it, in our most deep subconscious or unconscious parts, it lives. So we are linked to this transition that we are observing outwardly. And the risk during this time is we get caught up in the content. We find ourselves in a position or a reaction, a judgment. And the way the universe is working, people are going into enclaves, little separate bubbles in their own kinds of truths and their own perceptions of lies. And it is creating an upheaval. In addition, nature is coming forward and showing humanity what's coming. COVID has come. It's here. It's still with us. The entire order that we're trying to return to from the past is not going to be able to contain or manage or do a correction for this, because it is a shift in the collective consciousness, the source of which is beyond mind and intellect, positions and opinions, even the good and the bad. Good is not a powerful enough element to neutralize the bad. And the bad is not a powerful enough element to overtake the good. There is another force at work here that's beyond that good and bad, evil and virtue. And that's to bring about a shift. So it's hard to know what is true. It's hard to know what is right. The only place you can know that is within the core of your being that can rest in its eternal presence within your body. From that place, then what is consistent with your own dharma, your own evolution, will be clear, will come clear. It'll often take an action or make a commitment, and then that will reveal itself more and more clearly, and all the other confusing forces will fall away, and an alignment will come, and that truth for you will become your truth. And that truth may not be my truth. It may not be anyone else's truth. And that is the turmoil, that is the battlefield that we each have to work through. And the issue has to do now is, who do you believe? What do you trust? What's real? What's not real? It's all up in the air. The only place it's not is in that eternal, unchanging portion. And this is the part I'm speaking of from right now. This is the one that sees the long arc of life on this planet, of existence itself. So I'm speaking to you from that paradigm, the paradigm of the larger context of which this current period of transition is showing up. My journey of consciousness, I revealed a number of talks and many of my retreats, especially years ago. But it's in the old book, and it's also what I'm referencing here. And that is that consciousness is in an evolutionary journey. It left an origin, and yes, ultimately it'll come back to that origin, but it descended into a domain of existence, creating the creation. A force of consciousness with a will to become, to exist, to know of its own existence. It descended into matter. It created this physical universe. It exploded in its initial intention, in the potentiality that was there coming into a possibility, going everywhere, all time, all at once, way beyond what our science can measure or be aware of. So this is consciousness. We swim in an intentional, purposeful current of consciousness that existed even before this universe we know, little less before this planet, little less before life emerged on this planet, much, much before all that we have any conscious knowledge of. And this current works in its own ways, in its own mysterious unfoldings, using these three ways of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas to bring itself into existence, to discover it exists. We are the means by which consciousness became self-aware. The only thing is our awareness got associated with the body that carries all the remnants of the evolutionary journey that has occurred before bodies came into existence, including the time of bodies evolving. So if we look at the era we're in an epic change, an epic shift, but it's in a different domain than matter. It's in a different domain than life as we know it. It's in a different domain than mind or intelligence. It's in the domain of consciousness, which ultimately, when it becomes a self-aware, becomes the most powerful and effective force in the creation. But it's separated into our 7.6 billion parts on this particular planet. So there have been transitions before. Consciousness came into matter, and matter became life. Life evolved in its unspeakable diversities 900 million years ago on this planet or so. And then this plethora, a huge growth of different forms of life, from the most primitive to the most surprisingly developed, considering the short period of time it came in. And these then all took their own track, many, many perishing very early, a few surviving and evolving, coming out of slime molds and into organic biological forms, and then fish, and then coming out to land and becoming the reptiles and the insects and the birds and the forms of mammal life of which we carry. All of this evolution is within us. You can watch a child look at the embryo in the mother's womb and see its similarities to a fish, to a reptile, to a different type of species, each with its own form and character. So we bodies, the vessel that we inhabit, that we totally lose ourselves in our physical, vital, mental, intellect expressions, is really the only vehicle in which we could wake up and become self-aware in. Now, how do you know that? Well, are you self-aware now? Are you alive now? This is such a fundamental truth, we take it absolutely for granted. Like the air, you don't even question it. You don't question your own existence until you put the mind in there. And the mind then will bring on all kinds of stories and perspectives and distortions. Because it doesn't yet have a central organizing principle of its own reality. And then everything starts making sense. When we spiritually awake, we start tapping into that center pillar in which our physical, vital, and mental evolve. And when we discover that central pillar, be it a glimpse, we know in our whole being the truth of that. We can feel and experience and sense or be aware that there's another paradigm than the one you were born into. And many of us in this generation have discovered this through drugs, through circumstances, through the fact that we're exposed to so many different types of expressions of that awakened consciousness. That is becoming so much more accessible that more of us have the possibility of finding that self-aware, self-existent reality that lives within us. This is the only one, this is the only place where this conversation would make any sense. It depends upon how much your mind has been trained to understand there is such a thing as consciousness, how much you've had direct experience or awareness of this for yourself, how much you've been exposed to teachings that have languaged this in different ways throughout the known history of humanity. And then this prepares you to recognize that this moment that you are existing in has a huge background. For you to be, for us to be in this moment is all time, all death, all life, all growth, all accomplishment, all discovery, all invention, all the ability to innovate and to create and to design things using matter, creating new possibilities, the mobilization of the energy of the planet itself, of matter itself, allowed mankind to come out of its cave, to plant crops, to organize into villages, into communities, into townships, into commerce, into what we know as civilization, waking up from the deep obscurities of the consciousness of we as a species, as humanity, being totally caught in the physical, as if an animal with just a little bit more self-awareness than other animals, evolving into discovering how things work, like what is fire, and where is the food, and how to collaborate, and care for children, and care for those who could help care for children, and carrying this in movement into life and the organization of humanity took us through planes which would otherwise still be absolutely running this creation, which would be physical survival, me first, and the vital life force need to survive and to enhance and to preserve and protect itself. Now guess what? These aren't done with us. These are still here with you right now. They lie as part of the territory for you to reclaim, or actually say claim or discover. And you cannot do that from the ordinary consciousness that's run by the physical or the vital or the lower mental. It has to be done by at least a higher awareness, at least a developed mind, at least a rational intellect that can objectify and that can analyze and that can reason. And then I may begin to learn, okay, I cannot act on all my impulses when I want to, whenever I want to. I cannot kill the people I have resentment or hatred for. It begins to become managed. You begin to lay claim and authority and responsibility for those parts of us that are not aligned with the possibility of our current stage of development, whatever that may be, wherever we may be, in time, in place. This is the battlefield that I speak of. We're literally transmuting in our awareness, our self-awareness, the evolutionary remnants, the error, the failures, and the successes. Because the success as a physical being is not the same as success as a vital being. It's not the same success as a mental being. It's not the same success as a human being. And all these motivating principles lie inherent in us, in a vast domain of our subconscious, each of them having a certain claim on our current consciousness, if we know it or not. So the evolutionary movement is preparing a physical and vital and mental base in which consciousness could emerge and become self-aware, and then begin to claim the territory that came out of this entire original impulse, intent to be, to exist, to discover what that might be. Ultimately, it's to wake up to what we are so that we can wake up to our purpose. And our purpose has always been to meet and transmute those undeveloped parts of ourselves that are not yet aligned with the possibility of our times. There will always be great resistance, inertia, and momentum due to these undeveloped parts that were necessary in us to have a body, to be able to function, to live in a modern world. And who's in charge? Who makes this transition? Each of us. We can do it ahead of the curve of the rest of humanity, or we can be after the curve. But these transitions are inevitable. No matter what humanity does, you cannot stop the consequences of our impact on nature. It doesn't have a braking system that works suddenly. It's still coming. The momentum of physical matter and the laws of physical matter are not going to stop because we're changing our behavior. It's going to go, and there's a point where it's going to have consequences, and we've crossed that point. Great consequences are going to come, far beyond our generation, even if we do the best. So we must recognize that this transition is here, and what recognizes that in you is the one that can learn to adapt, to evolve, to grow into the right relationship of the times we're coming to, with both the humility and that sense of strength that comes from a purpose, that my job is to be here and to meet these times and to find these parts of myself that so easily gets overtaken during a time of transition. To find that one place that can know that life has a purpose that is evolving. The important fact to get is that we each chose to be here during this time, knowing much more than we did previously what this era of transition was about. And we came because there was enough awakening in us from our past lives, enough wisdom, enough suffering, enough depth of being and knowing that we wanted to be part of this purposeful transition, to play our role, to accelerate what the lesson needs to be recognized and lived and learned in ways that wasn't possible before. So I know that's true for me doing this work as a spiritual teacher. I know that I constantly see, both in myself and in others, what is not yet awake enough to recognize the full responsibility of your own purpose for being on the spiritual path, your own purpose for being on the planet, but rather the moods, the whims, the subconscious, unexpressed desires, wants, and fears are still ruling the kingdom, still determining what you decide to do or commit to, what you believe to be true or not. And this battlefield is within me. I struggle continuously with sorting out, is this serving? Is this coming from my ego? Is this due to the huge forces enhancing parts of my ego that wants to take over? Or is it what the new truth needs to be? Is this the possibility that I am living, discovering its truth versus previous truths that were not adequate to meet this time? And where does the resolution come? It comes in those times where I merge into the silent, eternal presence that lives me. And for me, this is the dominant force in my life. Everything else is on top of that. And from there, I can see the way. From there, I can recognize Yes, this is true, but this is also true. Yes, this you could see is wrong, but it also is serving. Yes, it is not how I would have done before my awakening, but yes, it is what's needed in this time where I am. So this is a battlefield of learning how to live aligned with the evolutionary purpose of these times and what can bring the greatest truth and love as the two measures to the world. This truth isn't part of the right or wrong, or my truth versus your truth. This is the presence and the knowing and the purposeful current of becoming that lives within us without a coding, that comes from a source much bigger than any one of us, but is also us, each of us. For me, the truth of this is felt. It's directly experienced. It's evidence of what I have known all along, from the very beginning. And it is evidence of the teachers that I had in the course of my life. All spoke to the universal paradigm, not just the individual paradigm, not just becoming a better or more successful human, but the paradigm of humanity, the paradigm of the lost souls, of the collective dejection, of the cry of the abandoned being by the ego. We have made so many false gods. We have made so many things true that are untrue, true. We've made money the greatest measure of worth. We worship the material more than we do any God. We've lost sight of our consequences of our actions. We're completely defended in our rationalizations and justifications and our little groups that talk to each other about the same belief system, the same values. We cannot know the bigger current from that place. So the time is calling us to awaken out of our individuality into our universal nature. We're coming to the time where each of us everyone on this planet is being impacted by the collective consciousness. It's in a hyper state of alertness. Each day in the news, it's like a hyper alertness. They're assigning value and meaning to just incidents that are happening momentarily in the course, in billions of lives in all different ways, all over the planet, as if this is what's true right now. We can't hold this transition from within the transition. We have to hold it from a place of recognition that's universal, not individual, at least collective. So what I speak here is the universal paradigm, as well as the collective paradigm. That we as a species are one species. The species of all living beings have been organized by science because they have certain geniuses, certain qualities, certain aspects, some of which serve and some which don't. Its own species and other species because of its existence. We're among those. And the species, when we're not a human ego, all know they're part of something. They don't know how they know, but they are. There's a sense of themselves and a recognition of what they are with others. The birds fly together. The fish gather. The trees grow in proximity of each other. Nature has created it that way. And in nature, all beings know of this connection. And through that, they know what to do. We human beings have lost that. We have forgotten that we're a one species. we have forgotten that everything that's going on in this planet is actually being felt by us on the deepest levels of our consciousness. At the very fundamental principle of the organization of our physical body, as a woman, as a man, as a child, as an older person, we carry something of what's there in the collective as there with us. We may be thinking thoughts of others without knowing they're the thoughts of others. We hang out with this group and we start taking on the characteristic of one group. Then we hang out with another group and we take on the characteristics of the other group without knowing we're doing that, because it's the same I amness that gets identified with one or the other over exposure and time and alignment or affinity of our system. We're actually empty vessels inhabiting a physical body that breathes and eats and delights in its own existence. It is these connection to all the rest of humanity that fills that empty vessel with content, with story, with emotions, with moods, with fears, with anxiety, with stresses. The existential stress of existing. Every generation carries its own little particular piece of existential stress, and they talk to each other, and they go into this emerging process which rebels against the old and creates a new, imagining it's better, but really just a new version of the old. We are that. We are the empty vessel, and we are the content, unless we wake up and recognize what we are as the emptiness that's beyond both of those. Becoming a universal being isn't creating something. It isn't making something happen. It isn't you working to become a universal being. It's a discovery that you are already a universal being. It's the recognition one day, oh, wow, what a negative thought. Where did that come from? That ain't me. That came from something. Oh, yeah, it came from there. It came from that person. Oh, I was so much sympathy for them, but they were so tortured. And now I have this terribly self-destructive negative thought. Where did this come from? Then you can see that you're actually an empty vessel with content trying to fill it. You can find a new place to stand than where you would usually go with your own match or your own version of what you picked up. This is what spiritual awakening is about, is to discover what it is that you are, and let it give you the good news, bad news. You're all of it. You are all of it. You're not just good. That may be the current organization. Another life before you, you were terrible. You were an awful creature. In this life, you're a wonderful creature. Everybody loves you. You love yourself. But these things are temporary events that occur in the evolution of that empty content. You fill it with a happy story, a miserable story, good story, happy story. So those of you who have begun this journey of discovering your universal nature, then you know that when you do that, you feel empowered, you feel nurtured, you feel a love, a connection, a wonder, a discovery of a quality of your own nobility. That's not based on your ego paradigm or self-worth or any of the other shame structures or adaptations to that shame structure that you may have. You begin to breathe with a greater gratitude, a greater recognition of the delight of actually being alive than you were when you're completely identified with the content. You begin to come out of that and discover the freedom of being. The freedom that carries with it a creative impulse to bring into existence that freedom, to make it real for yourself and real for others. Because this is the last phase of evolution. When we become self-aware, we're 3/4 of the journey of the entire evolution of the creation. When we wake up to that eternal principle that was there at the beginning, we begin to complete the last phase of the journey, where all of you who are self-aware and can begin this journey of discovery of your universal nature, you are the ones that are bringing forth the new humanity. You are the creators of a new paradigm for this species. And everything on this world will follow. We lead. Creation will follow. It will surrender itself. It will allow itself to be destroyed by us. Because it is here to support, it's here in worship of this human species, recognizing in its very essence something of that within itself, not knowing, because it's not awake enough to know. But that is what's accelerating its own evolution. A plant becomes a worm becomes a mouse becomes a bird becomes a mammal, a wolf, cow, a giraffe, because of us. Because we are the highest expression of that supreme principle on this planet. But we've been naive, we have been children, we have been locked up with everybody else who's in charge and I'm not. We have forgotten, we have not actually forgotten, we haven't yet discovered the true authority that is here lifting humanity. And these are not abstractions for me. I feel the world turn to me. I feel it as an experience when I walk through the deserts. I feel it attending, coming to attention. The sense of bringing this awakening into existence is with me. When I gather with you, it's much, much more enhanced because you too are that. For both of us, for me and for you. And I speak as if this is the one voice for us. That's what I feel. Not what I know, not a strategy, not an assessment, not an opinion. It's what I experience. So I know that all my teachers were pointing to this transition. Everyone who inspired me or lifted me up in the course of my life were speaking of this universal, here for the world, here for humanity. So it was inevitable that this was going to happen. And for each of you who has felt that same current, that call to be of service, then I say to you, you are already a universal being. And that you are in the process of discovering that truth. And there is nothing more important than that discovery in this world. It's not even about being on the right side or the wrong side of the battlefield of this time of transition. It's about recognizing you have a role to play for the world. And I assure you, the people that are on the other side right now, who are so angry and so ready to destroy everything, is they truly feel they're here for the collective. They're doing this for a mission. They're doing it for a purpose, even though it's, from one vantage point, it's misguided. So this is what it looks like. We're, as a species, waking up to the fact that we're here for all of us. And that life only has meaning when we make that sacrifice. When we're willing to let go of our lesser selves, our animal, earth, water, fire, elements, or transmute them into service for a larger purpose. We are the transmuting agency for the entire era of evolution, not just our own or our parents or our parents' parents or parents' parents, but the whole evolution of humanity. We are here to discover and meet the darkness, transmuting it into light as a vibrational shift that will lift all of life is cause and effect in the domains of consciousness. When we awaken, everyone around us awakens. When we evolve, everybody around us is forced to evolve, they like it or not. It's not you or me or any one of us doing this. It is something much greater, worthy of our worship, worthy of the recognition that that principle is what's with you. It's what you're becoming. And we always need that to remind us of our becoming a universal being. We need a principle. We need a person. We need an ideal. We need an image, or we need a sense of something greater. Because there's always, as long as we're in this dimension, we are very easy to lose the vantage point of that there is something yet greater. We live for the highest good. Now that word is loaded, but the highest possibility for humanity, which includes, very importantly, yourself. But you begin to be willing to sacrifice those parts of yourself that are not up for it. But not to repress them or dominate them, but to restrain them, to meet them, to know them, and let go of them. And in the process, they free up in you. They, too, that piece of darkness that was all along striving to come into existence with its desire or its vengeance or its anger or its lust, has enough time on the stage to be recognized, to be seen, that some quantum that's behind that gets reduced. We become more and more empty vessels. Our physical becomes relaxed. Our nervous system quiets. We can receive the input, the attacks, the vibrations that before the body didn't know how to be with it, and hold that in the space of that relaxation and allow it to just be there, not getting lost in it, not being taken down its rabbit hole, not using it to explain or justify what's currently happening in your life. But that is something that's just arising, which will also recede. And in this, we become an agency of transmutation, an agency by which we start lifting the world around us, because often what we take in isn't ours. And by meeting it, we meet it for them. Without them knowing it, they get lifted. And then they meet the next level of content. And at some point, they come to personal responsibility for their content. They begin to own and recognize, I'm doing this. I'm creating this misery. I have a role to play in the turmoil of these times, in my complacency, in my entitlement, in my habitual habits of comfort, pleasure, and enjoyment, and distraction, and entertainment. All of which can be there, none of which is wrong. But when that becomes an obscuring fog that prevents us to know our purpose on the planet, then it gets in the way. It starts taking on the content of that which is yet to be revealed in our systems. And our binge watching a Netflix series becomes a doorway to anger, to hatred, to fear, to anxiety, to doubt, to confusion. Right? All we have to do is indulge these creatures and they become terrible. I know, we have a little dog. Can't feed him when I'm sitting at the table because then he will never stop bugging me. So it's true for all of our parts. They don't know it. They're not evil. They're just run by more primitive structures than those that serve us. Becoming the mastery of this is to become aware of this, to be able to restrain those things that otherwise would run us, to be able to own our responsibility for it arising in our system. This is this work. This is the work, not Dharma's work or Satri's work. This is our work. As long as we think that the power, the forces that shape what's possible for us are outside of ourselves, this is the work. To keep discovering where we unwittingly lost track, where we've become so full of content that we've lost access to our purpose, to be here for the world, to make those sacrifices even when our ego doesn't want to take the actions that are aligned with that purpose, is the proof of our current capacity and willingness to serve something greater. Our heart's open at some point, even if you're an awareness being. And if you're not an awareness being and your heart is open and the anguish and the pain of the whole world keeps overtaking you, then your awareness will awaken. And it'll say, oh, this isn't mine. This is just showing itself. This is something that's happening because I'm so connected to everything. And you discover then again that still, empty, quiet vessel that you are in truth, feeling the love, feeling the overtaking, feeling the discerning through it all, and the freedom that it brings, the clarity, the end of confusion, and the alignment of your own consciousness to become the master of the domains that you have not yet mastered. So this is why we have this work. I went on the website today and looked at the global group selection. There are so many different groups, so many different programs. It's been a while since I've looked. And what are all these? These are all opportunities for you to implement your work. It's to organize your system, to align with a purposeful current, which is, in fact, the incarnational force that's on the planet, that starts coming through you and starts showing you, that is my old shit, and this is the truth. It starts bringing and enhancing our own ability to discern, to feel, to open up, to go beyond the structures of protection and shelter, self-diminishment and shame, vengeance and anger and resentment and projection, to discover that it's just the universe showing up in me. This is how it's looking right now. To be the mother and the father. To restrain it, but to give it space. To know that it needs to still reveal more of itself so that you can be able to meet it, the level that it was created in such a way that it is no longer necessary. We came out of 2 world wars. And we're heading for a 3rd. That was my youth, my teenage years. I remember in elementary school, when the sirens go off, this is where you go. Some of you are my age, you remember that. Yet we didn't. What happened? Well, we went into a suspension, a deterrent. Because humanity began to recognize that mutual self-destruction was not the way forward. And then we forgot the lesson. We've lived in the complacency of those, beyond, on the other side of those times. We've grown used to the fact that we were in fact in suspension since that time. And we're coming out of it now. We're recognizing war wants to happen again. We're recognizing the natures of the forces that took over, that had World War I and World War II, repeat themselves, showing up once again. Because they weren't met, they were suppressed. They were controlled by an agreement that was by its very structure perishable, because it couldn't carry the fullness of the eternal truth. Now, some parts of that worked. After the war, we helped our enemies. The United States did. Instead of destroying them and leaving them in that war, we did what we could with the Marshall Plan and lifted up. And we have up to now their gratitude. They are our allies now. We converted our enemies into allies. This is the transmutation. And that is why we're in a new time. Because of that noble act where a country already exhausted from war went into debt to help its enemies build back better. I mean, this is in our lifetimes. A great movement towards a collective awakening. Preparing us for the time we're in now, which now the true enemy isn't, these power-hungry remnants of our past, but the fact that the planet itself can no longer sustain this many people. It's being killed, dying. It wants to give everything it has for these human beings, but there's too many now. It can't do it. It's losing its ability to sustain this world. It has lost its momentum for the preservation of life. The body mass of mankind and the creatures we eat is 97% of the animal life on the planet, or the ones that we look at in the zoo. 3% remain from nature. You see them here in Nevada, coming up to the side of the road and gathering, herds, looking for water, grazing, crossing the road in the dusk. That's almost over. What's next is not going to be that. It'll be something else. We need to acknowledge that that is the transition we're in. We can plant trees, we can repopulate species, but in the times we're going into, we can't use the nostalgia of the past as a measure of the future. I'm sorry, we've crossed that threshold. Another order. It's the death of an old and the birth of a new. And yes, I feel this anguish. I feel this grieving. It's not just humans. It's all living creatures. Their time on this world is ended or ending. And their pain and anguish at the lost opportunity is with them in the subtle world as a vibrational frequency. And we can feel that. I can feel that. Some of you who are listening to me can feel this. This grieving, this anguish, this dying of the species that sustained us is with us in this time in many ways of sorrow. But that is a necessary sorrow because it's not done yet. It's not over. It's just going to be something other. What was behind physical nature is also the same great truth. What we know in the physical dimension of eternal is outer space. You can't overtake it. There's too much of it. It too is eternal, but it too is creation. Its end will be far, far beyond any measure of time we have, if it ends at all. It'll more likely just cycle. So we need to understand that that's a truth, even though it seems so sterile, so inhumane, so inhabitable. Good to feel this. Good to come to the recognition that all things die. All things end. And although there are subtle worlds associated with this physical world, they too will evaporate into the greater infinities. We are that eternal present that has these eras of being aware of itself embodied. The most precious, precious time in an evolutionary journey is its completion. The last few minutes. When we come out of this recognition, what I can say is there is a serene and solid recognition of personal responsibility for playing my part, a resolve to bring into existence something that hasn't yet existed in such a way that the best of the times that have passed and the greatest of the times that have yet to come can manifest, whatever that may be. I've spent moments in that future. I know it's wondrous. When we ascend into the very highest consciousness, we are in that moment of time that has not yet happened, depending on how close we are to that supreme reality. So I know the future. I've had glimpses of what it looks like. And it is wondrous in ways that we can't fully get now. It's extraordinary in its possibilities, just like we're discovering the extraordinary possibilities of the internet. Instant knowledge, whenever you want it, from anywhere in the world, at any time. We are in that state of a gestalting all at once, all of it. But we don't know it. We're still living in our little bubble, personal self. But there's a purpose. There's a reason this is here. There's a reason this is here because within us are all the lives lived, all the lives lived of those we're connected to, all the lives that lived before them, and before them, and before them. This will not be lost. The wealth of the suffering of consciousness as it came into matter over the eons of time and eventually became us is the treasure. It, if anything, will preserve a possibility for what we now know as humanity that goes beyond this era. The Mother and Sri Aurobindo spoke of the supramental creation. They spoke of a new ordering of matter itself, one that's not so dependent on the coding of the consciousness that is behind everything, a more energetic domain of being, where matter itself takes on a vibration that doesn't die in the way we die. That doesn't fail because it carries no longer the error of evolution, the habit and the momentum of birth and death. It carries a possibility of a fullness of experience that goes beyond anything our technology could provide. And I know it's coming. How soon? Probably not in my lifetime. But it's there in the subtle world. I can access it now. Yet to come. We have something to do when it comes. And if it establishes itself in time to mitigate what could be the very end of life on this planet. Because that certainly is what is needed. Nature's what she's going to do, the culling. She's going to reduce the populations. She's going to reduce the number of people who feed off of her. She will do it. But can she do it enough and quickly enough? She'll need humanity's collaboration. She cannot do this without our conscious collaboration. Our future is not dependent how many of us are on this planet. Our future is not dependent on how prosperous we may be. Our future is not dependent on who's control at any one time or not. That's already in motion, beyond the control of most of humanity. Only a few can act as the trim tab on the rudder of the great ocean liner of life of this planet. And we can do that by aligning ourselves with the current of truth consciousness that brings you into relationship with that empty vessel, that presence that lives within your body. And that expression coming through us to others becomes the means of aligning the collective consciousness with this time of transition. We can be the instrument, the vessel, the channel for this intervention force, because it is the one that can intervene in the destiny that otherwise is fixed. And along the way, we get everything. Everything you ever wanted, even though you didn't know you wanted. Everything you ever needed, without knowing you needed it. That every grace, every gift, everything becomes a gift. Everything becomes grace. Everything becomes a gracefulness, a full of graceness. And this nobility of our willingness to go beyond ourselves. All right, we only have a few minutes left. So this is as far as I can go today, or tonight, for some of you. I will continue in this inquiry in another version on Friday, and then again on Saturday. Knowing of the subtle energy body on Friday, and on Saturday, the piercing of the veil. So I invite you to join me for this, as we continue into this exploration, as we continue into this time of transition, in this next year of this work. Okay, let's take a few moments. There's a quote from Rumi: "What you seek is seeking you." I love it. So be aware of yourself in your body. Be aware of yourself as the experiential presence there in your body, breathing. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat Shri. All glory to the Supreme. May truth, consciousness, and grace manifest for all of you. Namaste.